The coalition had always underestimated humanity. They saw us as weak, disorganized, a minor species confined to a single star system. When they declared war, their transmission dripped with arrogance. They were certain of a swift victory. Their fleets were vast, their weapons perfected over centuries, their strategies honed into an art form. Humanity, they assumed, would crumble in weeks. They were wrong. Earth's skies did not darken with panic. Military channels buzzed with routine efficiency, civilian life continued, and the world seemed calm, almost indifferent. Our fleets didn't rush out to meet their armada. Our colonies sent no pleas for help. Instead, humanity moved with a quiet precision, the result of decades of silent preparation. Our ships were built for function, not form, with non-reflective hulls and minimal lighting, a stark contrast to the coalition's ornate warships. Every fleet, every ship, every orbital defense station was already in position, waiting for this exact moment. We had anticipated this war for generations. Now, the test had finally arrived. As coalition ships breached our outer system, they began their bombardments. Their weapons, capable of obliterating entire cities in seconds, struck at shimmering, almost invisible energy fields. When their plasma bolts made contact, the shields rippled like water, bending the incandescent energy and redirecting it harmlessly into the void. At first, the coalition leaders dismissed it as luck. Then, confusion set in. Their missiles vanished mid-flight, their warheads neutralized by pinpoint energy pulses that left behind only faint, dissipating rings of light. Fleets that had advanced in perfect formation suddenly buckled, their lead ships colliding with unseen gravitational distortions that warped the very fabric of space around them. Humanity wasn't fighting back in the way they expected. We were simply controlling the battlefield with rules the coalition didn't even know existed. Panic began to spread through the coalition's command structure. Their best analysts debated the anomalies, arguing over theories of human technology that seemed impossible. Some speculated we had mastered localized temporal manipulation. Others claimed it was a new form of predictive warfare. The Armada's ironclad confidence began to erode. But their high command, blinded by pride, demanded more aggression. They were convinced that overwhelming force would eventually break our defenses. They had fatally underestimated our patience and our ability to plan for the impossible. On Earth, we watched their fleets approach without haste. Every civilian system functioned normally. Every communication network operated without a hitch. Every orbital habitat remained calm. Humanity did not rely on reactionary violence. We relied on preparation, on knowledge, on the ability to act before a threat could fully manifest. The first salvo from the coalition fleet was repelled without a single human casualty. Our fleet formations shifted automatically, their movements fluid and predictive, like a flock of birds turning in perfect unison. On our command decks, holographic displays showed the coalition's trajectories seconds before their own computers had even finished the calculations. Our weapons remained hidden, sheathed within the dark hulls of our ships, waiting for the precise moment they would be needed. The coalition misinterpreted our calm as weakness. They decided if they couldn't break us with force, they would starve us into submission. They enacted sweeping trade sanctions, restricted access to major hyperlanes, and cut off what they believed were our crucial resources. They expected chaos, riots, and rebellion among our colonies. They expected humanity to bow under the pressure. But humanity had anticipated every contingency. Our colonies were largely self-sufficient, our supply networks resilient, our logistical systems decades ahead of their calculations. The sanctions hurt no one, at least no one on our side. Instead, the coalition's own trade networks began to falter, not from blockades, but from 1,000 invisible cuts. Convoys, their navigation data subtly altered, were rerouted into cosmic dust clouds or empty sectors of space, arriving weeks late with depleted fuel. Their entire galactic supply chain collapsed into chaos as critical ships were dispatched to the wrong systems. Entire battle fleets found themselves grounded by inexplicable malfunctions. Engine diagnostics would report perfect functionality, while power conduits mysteriously failed to deliver energy. It was a digital plague, woven into the very fabric of their commerce by human-designed algorithms that left no trace. Navigation arrays would suffer from tiny rounding errors that sent ships light years off course. Automated maintenance systems would trigger cascading phantom faults, ordering droids to dismantle perfectly functional reactors for non-existent flaws. On their capital ships, targeting computers would momentarily lock onto friendly vessels during drills, sowing paranoia and distrust. Coalition officers started accusing one another of sabotage. Their internal trust crumbled. The first signs of a systemic collapse appeared, all without a single shot fired by humanity. Then a message spread across all Coalition channels. It wasn't encrypted or private, it was broadcast openly for everyone to hear. It simply stated that their sanctions were an act of escalation, and that humanity had not yet responded in kind. The transmission carried a quiet but terrifying authority. It was a clear signal. We were capable of responding with far greater force, yet we were choosing restraint. On Coalition worlds, the message sparked widespread panic. If this is what humans could do without even engaging their fleets, what would happen if they ever truly decided to fight? Within weeks, the consequences of the Coalition's first mistake, the declaration of war, began to multiply. Internal divisions widened. Fleets reported conflicting orders. Colonies argued over loyalty. Their greatest scientific minds were no closer to understanding our systems and humanity. We did not strike back. We waited, we watched, and we prepared to show the galaxy what patience, planning, and precision could truly achieve. Thanks for watching. Be sure to follow for the next chapter in this story. In the silent, star-dusted expanse, a story unfolded that would echo through the cosmos for millennia. It was the tale of humanity's stand against the vast and seemingly invincible Coalition. The Coalition wasn't a single race, but a sprawling empire of 1,000 species, bound by conquest and fear. Their fleets were legendary, their numbers overwhelming. Against this tide, Earth and its fledgling colonies seemed like a mere footnote, destined to be erased. The Coalition's first salvos were devastating. They expected a quick, brutal campaign, another swift addition to their empire. But they hadn't accounted for human ingenuity. While they wielded overwhelming firepower, we wielded precision. While they sought to conquer, we sought to survive. This was never a war of numbers for us. It was a war of intellect. Our first major response wasn't a grand fleet engagement. It was a surgical strike, so precise it was like a ghost slipping through their lines. A single stealth corvette, the Whisper, navigated a treacherous asteroid field to reach the Coalition's primary command and control nexus. It wasn't about destroying their ships. It was about severing their communication. For 3 critical days, their gargantuan fleets were deaf and blind, unable to coordinate their attacks. Panic, a sentiment they rarely felt, began to ripple through their ranks. Next, we unveiled our masterpiece of defense, the Aegis Grid. This wasn't a wall of steel, but a network of quantum-entangled projectors that created localized space-time distortions. Coalition plasma cannons and kinetic slugs would simply vanish, redirected into pocket dimensions or flung into the void light years away. Their greatest strength, their overwhelming firepower, was rendered utterly useless. The psychological impact was immense. How do you fight an enemy you cannot hit? While the Coalition struggled to understand our defenses, their fleets blindly hammering against an invisible shield, we were preparing our final move. Our greatest minds had been working on Project Solitude, a weapon that didn't destroy but controlled. It wasn't a bomb. It was a gravitational lens of unprecedented scale, powered by a captive singularity. We positioned it at a strategic Lagrange point, a place of gravitational balance. When the Coalition, frustrated and desperate, gathered their entire remaining armada for one final cataclysmic push, we activated it. A colossal wave of focused gravity washed over their fleet. It didn't rip their ships apart. Instead, it gently but inexorably trapped them. Every single vessel, from the smallest fighter to the most titanic dreadnought, was caught in a gravitational well they couldn't escape. Their engines strained, their hulls groaned, but they were frozen in space, suspended like insects in amber. They were defeated without a single loss of life on their side. Trapped, powerless, with their supply lines cut and their command structure in chaos, the Coalition began to fracture. The species they had subjugated saw their chance. Rebellions ignited across their empire. The mighty coalition didn't fall to a human fleet. It collapsed from within, devoured by its own internal strife. We had won. Not with bigger guns or more ships, but with a better plan. We showed the galaxy that true power isn't about the force you can project, but the control you can exert. It was a victory of strategy over strength, of mind over matter. And in the quiet that followed, humanity's message to the universe was clear. We are here and we think differently. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through the stars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the cosmos. See you next time. For millennia, the galaxy bled. The Coalition, a brutal empire built on conquest and subjugation, had held countless worlds in its iron grip. Their reign was absolute, their cruelty legendary. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They underestimated humanity. Against all odds, we fought back. We rallied the oppressed, forged alliances in the crucible of war. And in a final, cataclysmic conflict, we shattered the Coalition's power, breaking their fleets and their will to dominate. The war was over. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what its new, unexpected stewards would do. Would humanity simply replace one tyrant with another? History is filled with victors who become the very monsters they fought. We chose a different path. We didn't want an empire. We wanted a galaxy of equals, a community of worlds free to choose their own destiny. Our first act wasn't to plant flags and demand tribute, but to begin the Great Reconstruction. Our fleets, once instruments of war, became vessels of aid and engineering. We rebuilt shattered worlds, delivered critical resources, and shared our technology not as a tool of control, but as a gift of empowerment. We taught worlds how to build self-sustaining economies, how to govern themselves fairly, and how to defend their newfound freedom. Of course, the galaxy wasn't magically peaceful. Remnants of the Coalition, bitter and vengeful, lurked in the dark corners of space. Warlords rose from the ashes, eager to carve out their own petty kingdoms. These were the new threats, the cancers that could grow and threaten the fragile peace. But our approach to them was surgical, not genocidal. We didn't wage massive wars of extermination. Instead, our special forces, the best of the best, conducted precise targeted strikes. They dismantled pirate fleets, neutralized warlord leaders, and severed the supply lines of rogue factions, all with minimal collateral damage. We were guardians, not conquerors. Our message was clear. The era of empires is over. The era of cooperation has begun. Perhaps our most radical act was how we treated our former enemies. The billions of soldiers, bureaucrats, and citizens of the old coalition weren't our prisoners. They were our patients. We understood that they were victims of a brutal ideology raised on a diet of fear and supremacy. We initiated the largest re-education and integration program the galaxy had ever seen. We didn't just tell them they were wrong. We showed them a better way. We brought their leaders to the table, not as captives, but as partners. We showed them the prosperity that comes from trade, not plunder. We showed them the strength that comes from alliance, not domination. Slowly, painstakingly, old enemies became new friends. Our ultimate goal was to make ourselves obsolete. A true guardian works to ensure they are no longer needed. We embedded resilience into the very fabric of the new galactic framework. We established the Galactic Concord, a council of worlds where every voice, from the smallest colony to the most ancient civilization, was heard and respected. We created a network of rapid response defense packs, allowing regions to protect themselves without relying on human intervention. We seeded the galaxy with knowledge, with democratic ideals, and with the unshakable belief that every sentient being has the right to live in peace and freedom. Today, the galaxy is a tapestry of thriving, independent worlds. Humanity is no longer a central power, but a trusted elder, a first among equals. Our story is not one of conquest, but of liberation. It is a testament to the idea that true strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the courage to uplift. We faced the ultimate test of power, and instead of seizing a throne, we built a table big enough for everyone. And that is a legacy far greater than any empire. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into a different kind of galactic future, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time. Have you ever wondered how humanity, the galactic newcomers, managed to climb to the very top of the food chain? It wasn't with bigger ships or more powerful weapons. Our story, the story of our ascent, is far more interesting. It's a tale of chaos, collapse, and the one species that saw opportunity where everyone else saw only ruin. For millennia, the galaxy was governed by the coalition of elder races, a grand, sprawling empire built on ancient pacts and traditions so old, no one remembered why they started. The Xylos, the Core, the Lumina, they were the Titans, the architects of galactic peace. They built the hyperlanes, regulated trade, and kept the more aggressive species in check. And humanity? We were the new kids on the block, barely 1,000 years out from our home system, Sol. We were seen as ambitious, adaptable, but ultimately insignificant. A minor player in a game run by giants. We joined the coalition, followed the rules, and learned. We learned about their economies, their politics, their technologies, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The coalition, for all its splendor, was a house of cards. It was rigid, slow to adapt, and choked by bureaucracy. The elder races were so caught up in their ancient rivalries and traditions that they could unsee the cracks forming right under their feet. Then came the Great Collapse. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding decay. A resource war in the Orion Spur, a secession crisis in the Cepheus Arm, a technological plague that shut down a third of the galactic network. One by one, the pillars of the coalition crumbled. The hyperlanes, once the arteries of galactic commerce, became pirate-infested death traps. Economies spiraled into hyperinflation. Entire systems were cut off, left to fend for themselves. The titans of the galaxy, the elder races, retreated to their core worlds, hoarding their resources and trying to weather a storm they could no longer control. Chaos reigned. This was the moment everyone predicted humanity would be wiped out. We were too spread out, too dependent on the coalition's infrastructure. The pundits and historians of the Xylos and Core wrote us off. They were wrong. Because while they saw chaos, we saw a vacuum. While they saw an end, we saw a beginning. Our first move was something no one expected. We didn't try to conquer. We didn't build a grand armada to carve out an empire. We stabilized. Our first priority wasn't territory. It was logistics. While other species were fighting over ruined planets, human freighter captains, backed by small but efficient security fleets, started reopening the old trade routes. They weren't glorious battles. They were escort missions. They were repair crews fixing hyperlane relays. They were engineers devising new, more secure communication protocols to replace the fallen galactic network. We offered a simple deal to the systems abandoned by the coalition. We'll get you food, we'll get you medicine, we'll get your networks back online. In return, fair trade, access, cooperation. It wasn't a demand, it was an offer. For worlds starving and isolated, it was a lifeline they eagerly grabbed. This is where our true genius emerged. Systems. While the elder races thought in terms of fleets and armies, we thought in terms of supply chains, economic models, and information networks. We created the Terran Exchange, a new financial system based on tangible assets and production capacity, not the worthless coalition credits that were now just pieces of plastic. It was stable, it was reliable, and it was human-run. Suddenly, everyone from the smallest independent freighter to the largest manufacturing guilds wanted in. We didn't just rebuild the old systems, we made them better. We introduced redundant hyperlane routes, decentralized communication hubs, and a universal translation software that was light years ahead of the coalition's clunky, centuries-old tech. Our philosophy was simple. A system is only as strong as its weakest link. So we reinforced every link. The elder races watched this from their fortified core worlds with a mix of confusion and contempt. They called us the janitors, the shopkeepers of the galaxy. They saw our focus on logistics and economics as undignified, a far cry from the grand political maneuvering they were used to. They failed to understand that the real power isn't held by the person sitting on the throne. It's held by the person who builds the throne, who maintains the castle, and who controls the roads leading to it. Our next phase was systemic integration. We established the human mandate, but it wasn't an empire in the old sense. It was a framework, a system of systems. New members didn't swear fealty to a human emperor. They adopted our operating systems. They integrated into our economic and logistical networks. They got a seat on the Mandate Council, where the currency wasn't military might, but production output and systemic stability. Of course, not everyone came willingly. Warlords who had carved out their own little empires from the coalition's corpse saw us as a threat. The pirate kings who ruled the outer lanes didn't like our new patrols, so we fought. But our wars were different. We didn't fight for conquest, we fought for control. An economic blockade was often more effective than a planetary bombardment. A precision cyber attack that crippled a warlord's finances could bring him to the negotiating table faster than a fleet of dreadnoughts. Our military, the Mandate Defense Force, was a scalpel, not a hammer. It was designed to surgically remove threats to the system, not to level worlds. One of our greatest victories was the Sinifor blockade. A Krogan warlord, Grak, had taken over a vital resource-rich sector and was demanding tribute from anyone passing through. The Quor would have sent a fleet and glassed his main planet. We did something different. We analyzed his entire operation. We identified the handful of worlds that supplied his fleets with fuel and his soldiers with food. We didn't attack Grak's fortress world. We simply cut him off. We offered his suppliers better prices and guaranteed security if they joined the mandate. Within 3 months, Grak's fleets were grounded. His armies were starving, and his own lieutenants sold him out to us for a shipment of grain and a stable trade contract. We took over a sector of a dozen worlds without firing a single shot from a capital ship. The elder races finally started to notice when their own economies began to depend on us. They needed resources from the outer rim, but the only safe way to get them was through human-controlled space, using human currency on ships protected by the mandate. They were the Titans, but they were trapped in their own gilded cages, and humanity held the key. The climax of our rise wasn't a battle, but a meeting. Thorn didn't argue, he didn't make threats. He simply projected a single image into the center of the hall, a real-time map of the galaxy. It showed every trade route, every financial transaction, every communication signal. Over 90% of it glowed with the blue of the human mandate. The red of the old coalition was confined to a few tiny pockets, their own core worlds. He said, "The old ways are gone. This is the new way. Not because we conquered it, but because it works. You can either be a part of it, or you can be a museum exhibit." That was the moment. The moment the galaxy realized that while they had been playing checkers, humanity had been playing chess. We didn't seize power. We became the power. We didn't tear down the old house. We just built a newer, better one all around it until the old one was irrelevant. Today, humanity stands at the center of galactic affairs. We are not rulers in the old sense. We are custodians. We are the system administrators of a civilization reborn from the ashes. We proved that true, lasting power doesn't come from the barrel of a gun, but from a balanced ledger, a stable network, and a simple revolutionary idea that a rising tide lifts all ships. We are the tide. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through humanity's rise to power, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from across the galaxy. See you next time. Across the vast silent tapestry of the galaxy, a new order has emerged, not born of fire and conquest, but of quiet, unyielding influence. For millennia, humanity watched from the shadows, learning the rhythms of the cosmos, the rise and fall of empires, and the fatal flaws of ambition. We did not build fleets to conquer worlds. We built systems to connect them. They called us the Silent Empire, a name whispered in the courts of dying powers and the rebellious strongholds of rogue factions. These challengers, forged in the old ways of war and dominance, saw our restraint as weakness. They tested our borders, raided our trade routes, and broadcast their defiance across the stars. Yet each rebellion faltered, not against overwhelming force, but against an unshakable foundation. Their fleets ran dry of fuel, their economies collapsed as vital resources ceased to flow, and their alliances crumbled under the weight of their own instability. They were not defeated in battle. They were simply rendered irrelevant by a system they could no longer survive without. Our power isn't measured in warships, but in the steady hum of the galactic energy grid, a network so vast and intricate that it has become the very lifeblood of civilization. Every jump gate, every planetary shield, every city light pulses with the energy we provide. We built the trade lanes that carry goods from the core to the rim, ensuring prosperity and stability. We established the unified defense protocols that protect against cosmic horrors and rogue stars, a shield for the weak and a deterrent for the ambitious. To fight humanity is to fight the infrastructure of existence itself. This control was not seized. It was earned through generations of strategic patience. We offered stability where there was chaos, prosperity where there was poverty, and security where there was fear. We did not demand fealty or tribute. We simply built a better galaxy and then invited everyone to live in it. The price of admission was simple: peace. Civilizations that once warred for centuries now sit at the same negotiating tables, their old hatreds supplanted by shared interests and mutual dependence. We didn't conquer their spirit. We gave them a future worth protecting. Perhaps the most profound impact of our rise is not physical, but psychological. In a universe accustomed to the clash of titans and the roar of cannons, our silence is deafening. Other races look upon us with a mixture of awe, confusion, and a deep, unsettling respect. They see a power that could shatter galaxies but chooses to build them instead. They see a species that holds the fate of trillions in its hands and acts not as a ruler but as a custodian. This restraint is a weapon more potent than any super laser, for it has reshaped the very soul of the galaxy. It teaches a new, radical philosophy, that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the will to create and preserve. Humanity's empire is not one of territory marked on a star chart. It is an empire of ideas, of systems, of shared destiny. It is woven into the very fabric of galactic life, a silent, omnipresent force guiding civilizations toward a future they could never have achieved alone. The age of war is over. The age of humanity has begun, not with a bang, but with a quiet, steady hand guiding the stars. Thanks for watching. If this story sparked your imagination, follow us for more journeys into the cosmos. With former coalition space stabilized, humanity turned its attention to long-term galactic resilience. They did not enforce rule, but ensured that the systems they had built could maintain order independently. Energy networks, trade routes, and defense grids were refined to anticipate failures before they occurred. Civilizations adapted quickly, internalizing principles humans had embedded into infrastructure, governance, and interstellar communication. Stability became a natural consequence of design rather than coercion. Rogue factions continued to emerge, attempting to exploit gaps or weaknesses. Yet humans had anticipated every scenario. Fleets capable of immediate intervention were stationed strategically, but they acted only when required. Ships intercepted threats with precision, neutralizing enemy vessels without unnecessary casualties. Civilizations observed these interventions and adjusted behavior, realizing that resistance against humans was futile. Power had shifted not through destruction, but through controlled influence and foresight. Trade and diplomacy flourished under human-guided systems. Interstellar commerce became reliable across previously hostile sectors. Disputes were mediated through automated networks designed to detect inequities, sabotage, or mismanagement. Former coalition members found themselves integrated into a web of interdependence. Every decision carried consequences, and every sector depended on collaboration. Humanity's presence ensured that misjudgment, not aggression, would be the deciding factor in survival. Education and knowledge sharing became tools of stability. Human experts worked with former coalition scholars to teach governance, logistics, and technology. New systems emphasized resilience and transparency, reducing the chance of unilateral miscalculation. Civilizations that once relied on authoritarian oversight learned to operate autonomously while remaining interconnected. The galaxy began functioning as a network, with humanity's principles at its core. The psychological impact of human restraint was profound. Humans possessed unmatched power, yet they wielded it sparingly, decisively, and morally. Entire species recognized that declaring war, attempting sabotage, or pursuing reckless aggression would result in immediate and unavoidable consequences. Fear of retaliation was replaced by respect for preparation, patience, and systemic control. Stories of the first human war became both history and morality lesson. Underestimate humans at your peril. Human fleets, though capable of obliteration, were rarely used. They patrolled key hyperlanes and strategic sectors, ensuring stability while avoiding unnecessary engagement. Civilizations learned that humans did not rely on intimidation. Their mastery lay in the careful orchestration of outcomes. Rogue factions attempting to exploit chaos quickly found themselves isolated, neutralized, or contained. Humanity's influence was invisible yet absolute, permeating every system without demanding obedience. Former coalition leaders struggled to adapt. Their centralized authority had collapsed, replaced by distributed governance and automated enforcement. Many attempted subversion, hoping to regain power through deception or manipulation, but human systems anticipated such maneuvers. Communications were monitored, supply chains adjusted, and rogue elements rendered powerless. Humanity had not taken control. They had made control unnecessary, and any attempt to undermine it was self-defeating. Even in remote regions far from Seoul, human influence was felt. Civilizations discovered that disasters, natural, technological, or political, were mitigated automatically by interlinked systems. Stability became the default condition, with human oversight present only when intervention was absolutely necessary. The galaxy had been rewired, ensuring that no single species could replicate the coalition's catastrophic mistake of declaring war. The first human war had transformed from a conflict into a lesson etched into the galaxy itself. The coalition's arrogance had inadvertently demonstrated humanity's unmatched foresight, patience, and strategic mastery. Humans had survived, adapted, and guided the galaxy toward resilience without ever seeking domination or glory. Their restraint had become a defining principle, showing that true power was measured not by weapons or fleets, but by preparation, intelligence, and the ability to shape outcomes without aggression. By the end of this era, peace was no longer fragile. Conflicts occurred, but they were localized, contained, and quickly resolved. Trade and communication thrived. Civilizations learned to function independently while remaining interconnected. Humanity had achieved a level of control that did not require coercion, turning the first human war into a permanent blueprint for stability, resilience, and cooperation across the galaxy. Underestimating humans, the first mistake of the coalition, had become the greatest lesson the galaxy would ever learn. As centuries passed, humanity's influence became embedded in the very systems of the galaxy. Planets that had once relied on authoritarian control now operated autonomously within interlinked networks designed for stability and resilience. Trade flowed seamlessly, energy was efficiently distributed, and communication channels prevented misunderstandings that could spark conflict. Humanity had reshaped civilization without ruling it. Their victory was quiet, systemic, and enduring, a permanent lesson in foresight and preparation. Rogue factions still attempted to exploit gaps, but humans had anticipated nearly every contingency. Autonomous defense platforms, self-correcting navigation systems, and intelligence networks neutralized threats before they could escalate. Human fleets acted only when absolutely necessary, targeting precise systems rather than populations. Civilizations quickly realized that aggression was futile. Any attempt to challenge humanity's influence failed, not because of brute force, but because the galaxy itself had been structured to prevent failure. Former coalition leaders learned hard lessons in humility. Attempts at subterfuge or rebellion against human-designed systems were consistently thwarted. Communications were monitored, supply lines redirected, and rogue elements rendered powerless. Humans had engineered a galaxy in which miscalculation carried immediate consequences. Authority no longer required intimidation or military might systems. Enforced compliance more effectively than any fleet ever could. Education and knowledge sharing became central tools in ensuring stability. Humans worked with scholars, engineers, and leaders across species to teach governance, logistics, and technological foresight. They shared enough knowledge for civilizations to function independently, but ensured that rogue experimentation or reckless mismanagement could never destabilize the networks humans had built. Gradually, civilizations internalized the principle that cooperation, Transparency and foresight were essential for survival. Humanity's restraint became a model for power. They acted decisively when needed but rarely, demonstrating that true strength lay not in violence but in control over outcomes. Entire fleets remained stationed across strategic sectors, their mere presence enough to deter aggression. Civilizations learned that misjudgment, not confrontation, was humanity's deadliest weapon. The galaxy adjusted to this reality, evolving to avoid mistakes that could provoke human intervention. Even remote systems, far from Sol, were subtly influenced by humanity's foresight. Automated systems ensured planetary stability. Trade routes adapted dynamically, and rogue elements were neutralized before they could threaten civilization. Disasters, whether natural or technological, were mitigated efficiently. Humanity's presence was invisible yet absolute, embedded into the structures that govern daily life and long-term survival. The psychological impact was profound. Stories of the First Human War, how the Coalition had underestimated humanity and suffered catastrophic consequences, were taught as cautionary tales. Civilians, leaders, and scholars across the galaxy internalized the principle that underestimating humans was the gravest mistake imaginable. Power was no longer defined by fleets or weapons, but by patience, preparation, and the ability to shape outcomes without aggression. Humanity had achieved what no other species could: a galaxy in which stability was the default. Conflict was contained, and survival depended on foresight rather than force. The Coalition's initial mistake, the declaration of war, had inadvertently set the stage for humanity's enduring influence. Humans had survived, adapted, and ensured that the galaxy itself could not repeat the same errors. Their victory was systemic, invisible, and permanent. Even as civilizations prospered, humans continued to explore, innovate, and refine their influence. They developed new technologies, studied distant star systems, and subtly adjusted networks to prevent emerging threats. They had proven that power did not require conquest, that authority did not require fear, and that true victory was measured by the longevity of stability, not the destruction of enemies. By the end of this era, humanity's lesson was clear and immutable. Patience, preparation, and strategic mastery were more powerful than aggression. Declaring war on humans had been the first mistake of the Coalition, and it had guaranteed the galaxy would never forget it. Humanity had transformed the cosmos without seeking glory, conquest, or revenge, simply by surviving, adapting, and shaping the conditions in which civilizations could endure. With the galaxy largely stabilized, humanity turned its attention to ensuring long-term resilience. Their influence, though invisible to most, had become absolute. Trade networks operated flawlessly, energy grids adjusted dynamically, and defensive systems protected civilizations from rogue elements or natural disasters. No central authority was needed. Humans had embedded stability into the fabric of the galaxy itself. Their victory was systemic, enduring, and invisible, a quiet proof of foresight and preparation. Rogue factions continued to test the limits of human systems, attempting to exploit gaps or resist guidance. Yet every attempt was neutralized before it could escalate. Fleets were intercepted, engines disabled, and command networks overridden. Civilizations observed these interventions and adjusted behavior accordingly, understanding that resistance to human influence was not only futile but self-destructive. Humanity had achieved a form of control that did not rely on fear, but on inevitability. Former Coalition leaders had long been humble. Their attempts to regain authority were consistently thwarted by automated systems and distributed governance structures humans had established. Communications were monitored, resource flows redirected, and rogue elements rendered powerless. The galaxy had been redesigned so that miscalculation carried immediate consequences. Authority was enforced by design, not by fleets or intimidation, and the lesson was clear: misjudging humans was catastrophic. Education became a central tool in reinforcing this new order. Humans collaborated with scholars and leaders across species to teach governance, logistics, and technological foresight. Knowledge was shared carefully, enough for civilizations to thrive independently, but not enough for reckless individuals to recreate the chaos that had sparked the First Human War. The result was a culture of responsibility, accountability, and cooperation. Civilizations internalized the principle that foresight was more powerful than force. Humanity's restraint remained exemplary. Fleets capable of massive destruction were deployed only when necessary, and always with precision. Rogue elements were neutralized surgically, with minimal collateral impact. Civilizations understood that misjudgment rather than confrontation was humanity's most dangerous weapon. The galaxy learned to adapt, evolve, and operate within the systems humans had set in place. Peace was no longer fragile. It was built into the architecture of civilization itself. Even distant systems felt humanity's influence. Automated networks ensured planetary stability, optimized trade routes, and neutralized emerging threats before they could escalate. Disasters, whether natural or technological, were mitigated quickly and efficiently. Human presence was subtle yet absolute, embedded into the structures that governed daily life. Civilization had become self-correcting, resilient, and sustainable because humans had designed it that way. The psychological impact of human restraint was profound. Species that had once feared humans now revered them for their foresight, patience, and strategic mastery. The first human war became a foundational lesson. Any species that underestimated humans risked disaster. Entire generations learned that true power was measured not by weapons or fleets, but by preparation, intelligence, and the ability to shape outcomes without aggression. Humanity had achieved what no other species could, a galaxy in which stability, cooperation, and survival were the natural state. The coalition, as first mistake declaring war, had not only failed to destroy humanity but had catalyzed a permanent transformation of the galaxy. Humans had survived, adapted, and guided civilizations toward resilience without ever seeking conquest or revenge. Their victory was quiet, systemic, and enduring. Even as civilizations prospered, humans continued to explore, innovate, and refine their influence. They observed, studied, and subtly adjusted systems to prevent emerging threats. Humanity had proven that true strength lay not in destruction, but in the ability to plan, prepare, and endure. By the end of this era, the galaxy understood one immutable truth. Declaring war on humans was the first mistake, and no civilization would ever make it again. By now, humanity's influence had become a quiet but unshakable foundation of galactic civilization. Systems operated smoothly, trade and communication networks flourished, and defensive grids neutralized threats before they could endanger entire star systems. Humans did not govern directly, nor did they demand loyalty. Their victory was embedded in structure, foresight, and the inevitability of their design. Civilization had adapted to their principles, and the galaxy now ran efficiently without the constant threat of war. Rogue factions persisted, attempting to exploit any perceived weakness, yet each effort was thwarted swiftly and decisively. Human intervention was minimal but precise. Fleets intercepted rogue ships. Navigation systems disrupted unauthorized maneuvers, and command structures were neutralized without unnecessary destruction. Civilizations learned quickly that defiance was pointless. Power now resided not in fleets, but in preparation, patience, and systemic intelligence. The galaxy had become self-correcting, with humans as the unseen architects of order. Former coalition leaders had been permanently humbled. Attempts at subversion, manipulation, or rebellion against the human-designed systems were consistently defeated. Communications were monitored, supply chains redirected, and rogue elements rendered powerless. Misjudgment, not aggression, was humanity's deadliest weapon, and the galaxy had internalized the lesson. Any species that underestimated humans risked annihilation or permanent irrelevance. Education became humanity's subtle yet enduring tool. Scholars and leaders across species studied governance, logistics, and foresight, guided by humans who shared knowledge carefully. Civilizations learned to operate independently while remaining interconnected, and dangerous experimentation or mismanagement was detected and neutralized before it could threaten stability. Cooperation became the default, and mistrust gradually gave way to accountability and interdependence. Humanity's restraint became a model for power. Fleets capable of devastating entire sectors were deployed only when absolutely necessary, and then with precision. Rogue elements found themselves neutralized surgically, leaving civilians unharmed. Misjudgment had become the true danger of the galaxy, and humans demonstrated that the consequences of error could be unavoidable. Civilization adjusted, learning to respect, follow, and anticipate human systems. Even distant regions far from Seoul were shaped by human foresight. Automated networks stabilized planetary environments, managed energy distribution, and controlled hyperlane traffic. Civilizations discovered that disasters, technological, political, or natural, were mitigated efficiently before they could escalate. Humanity's presence was invisible, but it governed outcomes nonetheless. Stability, cooperation, and survival were the default, all because humans had designed the galaxy that way. The First Human War, long concluded, remained a cautionary tale. The Coalition's initial mistake declaring war had sparked the permanent restructuring of the galaxy. Humanity had survived, adapted, and transformed civilization without seeking glory or conquest. They had acted with patience, precision, and foresight, demonstrating that the true measure of strength lay not in weapons or fleets, but in planning, preparation, and the ability to shape outcomes without aggression. With centuries of observation, humans refined their influence further. They adjusted networks, reinforced systems, and monitored emerging threats, always ensuring that the galaxy remained stable. Civilization had become resilient, interdependent, and accountable. Humans had achieved the ultimate victory, a galaxy in which mistakes like the Coalition's first era could never happen again. Power no longer required intimidation. Authority could exist quietly through design and foresight. The lesson of humanity was simple, undeniable, and permanent. Declaring war on humans was the first mistake, and it was one that no species would ever repeat. Every civilization understood that humans were patient, prepared, and capable of reshaping entire systems without resorting to destruction. Their restraint was a weapon, their planning a shield, and their influence a guarantee of stability. Humanity had survived the impossible, and in doing so, had transformed the galaxy forever. In the centuries following the First Human War, humanity's presence had become the invisible backbone of the galaxy. Civilization no longer depended on intimidation, fleets, or coercion. Stability, trade, communication, and defense operated flawlessly, guided by human-designed systems that were self-correcting and resilient. Planets prospered, fleets operated efficiently, and conflicts that once threatened extinction were now contained before they could escalate. Humans had won, not through conquest, but by ensuring the galaxy could never fail again. Rogue factions persisted in small pockets, attempting to test the limits of these systems. Each time, humans intervened only when necessary, their approach precise and surgical. Ships were neutralized, communications disrupted, and threats contained without harming civilians. Civilizations quickly learned that resistance was futile. Misjudgment, not aggression, had become the galaxy's deadliest risk, and humanity's restraint amplified the consequences of error. The First Human War was a lesson repeated daily across countless worlds. Underestimate humans, and failure was inevitable. Education and guidance became humanity's most enduring influence. Scholars, engineers, and leaders across the galaxy were taught the principles of governance, logistics, and foresight. Dangerous experimentation was monitored and corrected before it could destabilize systems. Cooperation became ingrained. Autonomy was nurtured, yet interdependence ensured resilience. Civilization learned to function independently while remaining accountable, all without humans enforcing obedience. Humanity had transformed the galaxy into a living, self-regulating network. They called it the First Human War, a name dripping with the Coalition's arrogance. They broadcast their declaration of war across 1,000 systems, a grand spectacle heralding what they believed would be a swift and total victory. They saw us as primitive, scattered, and chaotic. They expected a glorious charge, a decisive battle where their overwhelming might would shatter our fledgling defenses. But they fundamentally misjudged their opponent. Humanity did not meet them on the fields of glory they had prepared. We did not play their game. Instead, we waited. We endured their initial onslaughts, absorbing blows that would have broken lesser species. And while their grand fleets patrolled empty skies, searching for a battle we refused to give, our true war began. Not with lasers and explosions, but with whispers and algorithms. We didn't attack their warships. We attacked their supply lines, their economic markets, their communication networks. We introduced carefully crafted data plagues that eroded their archives, turning allies into rivals. We didn't break their ships. We broke their trust, their economy, their entire societal structure from the inside out. They were an empire built on a rigid, interconnected system, and we patiently, precisely, pulled one thread at a time. The coalition didn't fall to a climactic final battle. It simply ceased to function, collapsing under the weight of its own complexity, dismantled piece by piece until nothing was left. A quiet, systemic death for an empire that roared. Even the most distant systems felt the effects of human foresight. Automated systems managed planetary resources, controlled trade routes, stabilized energy networks, and prevented disasters. Rogue actors were neutralized, not destroyed, and survival depended on cooperation and accountability. Civilization was no longer fragile. It was resilient. Humans had achieved a rare victory, total influence without domination and power without destruction. Humanity's fleets remained, but their purpose was strategic rather than combative. They observed, guided, and intervened only when systems themselves were at risk. Civilizations quickly realized that human intervention was inevitable in moments of crisis, yet always precise and limited. Peace, previously fragile and temporary, had become systemic and enduring. The galaxy itself was a monument to human foresight and restraint. By this time, declaring war on humans was universally recognized as folly. The first human war had begun as a test of strength, but it had ended as a demonstration of intellect, preparation, and long-term strategy. The coalition had learned too late that aggression against humans was fatal. Their defeat had not come from firepower alone, but from the careful orchestration of patience, planning, and systemic foresight. Humanity had won by ensuring the galaxy could never repeat the mistakes that led to conflict. Humanity continued to explore, expand knowledge, and refine systems without interfering unnecessarily. They acted as observers, advisors, and stabilizers, ensuring the galaxy remained resilient for generations to come. Civilizations thrived because humans had taught them to anticipate problems, cooperate efficiently, and manage resources responsibly. Conflict was rare, and when it occurred, it was quickly contained. Stability had become the natural state of the galaxy. The lesson endured. Humanity's first victory had been survival. Their second had been restructuring the galaxy. And their final triumph was the permanent embedding of foresight, resilience, and accountability into civilization itself. Declaring war on humans was the first mistake, and the consequences of that mistake had reshaped the cosmos. Every species, every leader, and every generation would carry that knowledge forward. In the end, humanity had achieved something greater than conquest or revenge. They had created a galaxy that could endure. Their power was invisible, their influence systemic, and their victory eternal. The coalition's first mistake had ensured the rise of a species that would never be underestimated again. Humanity had won not through aggression, but through wisdom, patience, and preparation. The galaxy, forever changed, would always remember, war with humans was the first mistake, and the last one any civilization would make.